Welcome back to the World History. Today, we step into the shadows of secrecy, science, and statcraft, into a time when the fate of millions hung on one decision. This is the story behind the most powerful weapon ever created. And it all began with minds racing against time. In an underground lab beneath the American desert, the brightest minds of the century gathered under one name, the Manhattan Project. Illuminated by glowing blueprints and guarded in utmost secrecy, these scientists weren't just building a bomb, they were rewriting the laws of destruction. Miles away in the White House, a newly sworn-in President Harry Truman sat in silence, staring at a classified folder stamped in red, "Atomic Bomb Deployment." The weight of the world pressed on his shoulders. Was he ready to unleash what mankind had never dared? July 16, 1945. The skies above New Mexico lit up with a fire the world had never seen. The Trinity test had succeeded. A fiery mushroom cloud rose into the heavens, the beginning of a new era. Baptized in flame, General Leslie Groves, the military force behind the project, stood side by side with scientist J. Robert Oppenheimer. Together they had built the unthinkable. Yet, as the bomb neared completion, Oppenheimer's words whispered through history. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." In secret war rooms, heated debates erupted. Could Japan be forced to surrender without it? Was there any other way to end the war swiftly? Truman listened, calculated, and contemplated. But time was slipping away, and lives were being lost every hour. On a steel table, two deadly siblings were born, Little Boy and Fat Man, crafted. With surgical precision, these bombs were not prototypes anymore. They were ready. Each rivet, each wire, designed for one final destination. In the final hours, inside a guarded base, the crew of the B-29 bomber Enola Gay received their mission orders. Maps were spread. The target, Hiroshima. The payload sat silent nearby, waiting to alter history in mere hours. Far away, Albert Einstein read the morning headlines with a heavy heart. Though not directly involved, it was his letter that helped trigger the project. Alone in his study, regret clouded his genius. This wasn't the outcome he'd imagined. In a dimly lit military warehouse, final preparations were underway. Men in uniform handled the bomb with reverence and fear, knowing they weren't just arming a weapon, they were setting the stage for a new kind of war. Across the globe, Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt, allies bound by war, now stood, divided by power. Whispers of the bomb's existence began to circulate. The world was watching, waiting. The balance of power was about to shift forever. August 6, 1945. The skies above Hiroshima were clear, deceptively peaceful. At 8:15 a.m., the American B-29 bomber Enola Gay flew silently over the city, carrying a deadly payload known as Little Boy. Below, people walked to work, children played in the streets, and vendors opened their shops, unaware that death was falling from the sky. Moments later, the world changed. A blinding flash tore through the city, followed by a roar that silenced everything. From a distance, the explosion resembled a monstrous mushroom cloud, a rising column of fire, ash and smoke that reached over 10 kilometers high. Hiroshima, a city of over 300,000, was now a smoldering ruin. At ground zero, the shockwave moved faster than sound. Concrete buildings crumbled like sandcastles. Wooden homes burst into flames instantly, and people were vaporized without warning. The heat was so intense, over 40 degrees Celsius, that shadows were burned into the walls where humans once stood. Entire neighborhoods vanished in less than a second. For a few, there was a brief moment to look up. A dot in the sky, a flash, then the silence was broken. Survivors recalled the eerie stillness before the blast, and then the world turned white. Skin melted, eardrums burst, and buildings collapsed, all in one terrifying instant. What remained was a skeleton of a city. Hiroshima burned with firestorms that raged for hours. Survivors crawled through streets of flame, surrounded by collapsing walls and rising smoke. The sky turned black with ash. The silence that followed was broken. Only by cries of agony and the crackling of endless fires, those who lived faced a new horror, radiation sickness. Children wandered with flesh hanging from their arms, their clothes torn and scorched. Skin blistered, eyes swollen shut, and hair fell out in clumps. Some died within hours. Others suffered for weeks. Doctors had no idea how to treat the invisible. Killer now ravaging the city, temples became triage centers. Priests and nurses worked side by side, wrapping burns with torn bed sheets, using buckets of water to soothe the wounded. Supplies were almost non-existent. Doctors treated hundreds with only a handful of bandages. The air reeked of burnt flesh and sorrow. Death was a constant companion. 3 days later, on August 9, 1945, the nightmare repeated. Nagasaki, a city nestled between hills, home to factories and families, now heard the blare of air raid sirens. Some fled, others hid. They had heard of Hiroshima but couldn't believe it would happen again. And then at 11:02 a.m. it did. Fat Man exploded above Nagasaki with even greater force. From the mountains, witnesses saw another mushroom cloud rise into the heavens. This one was red-hot, pulsing with fury. In seconds, 75,000 people were dead or dying. The hills around the city echoed with screams and collapsing buildings. It was Hiroshima all over again. Only worse. In the ashes of Nagasaki, one image stood out, a mother, barely alive, shielding her lifeless child beneath. Her body, around her were ruins, twisted metal, and shattered glass. The bomb had taken everything: homes, families, futures. Survivors like her would carry the scars inside and out for the rest of their lives. When news broke that Japan had surrendered, the world erupted, but not all in celebration. In Times Square, crowds gathered around radio speakers, listening as Emperor Hirohito's voice echoed for the first time, surrendering unconditionally. Flags waved and hats flew into the air, but behind many eyes was something deeper, the haunting knowledge of what had made it all end. Justice came swiftly. In Tokyo, war crimes tribunals began. Generals and ministers sat behind glass, stoic as prosecutors described atrocities committed across Asia, but in hushed corners, people whispered, who would judge the unleashing of the atomic bomb? Could the victors be held to account for a weapon that destroyed cities in seconds? On the deck of the USS Missouri, under heavy skies, American and Japanese officials signed the surrender. Their pens moved slowly over parchment, but behind them stood the weight of 2 atomic shadows. The ceremony was quiet, cold, and final. The war was over, but the nuclear age had just begun. In Hiroshima and Nagasaki, time didn't heal all. Wounds, radiation lingered in the blood of survivors, passed on to children. Many were born with deformities, missing limbs, growth abnormalities, or internal diseases. Yet they smiled, played, and lived among the ruins. They became known as hibakusha, living reminders of atomic war. Out of the ashes, peace began to bloom in Hiroshima. A memorial rose by the river where batas once floated. People gathered every year with glowing candles and folded paper cranes, symbols of hope, healing, and a vow: never again. The atomic dome stood behind them, untouched. As a silent guardian of memory. Years later, Robert Oppenheimer stood before cameras, thinner, quieter, haunted. In some sort of crude sense, he said, the physicists have known sin. The man who gave the world the bomb now walked through life with a ghost in his eyes. His brilliance had birthed something he no longer understood. The bomb didn't. And fear, it multiplied it. As the Soviet Union tested its own atomic arsenal, the world split in two. Cold War lines were drawn on glowing maps, red for the USSR, blue for the USA. It was no longer a question of if the bomb would fall again. But when in marble halls of the United Nations, world leaders argued passionately about disarmament. Some demanded bans, others stockpiled warheads. Tensions soared, and yet the memory of Hiroshima always hovered like a ghost in the room, reminding them all of what one bomb could do. Today Hiroshima thrives. Glass towers rise where ashes once lay, children ride bikes past cafes and schools. But near the river, the atomic dome still stands, its bones exposed, untouched by reconstruction. Tourists pass in silence. Some cry, I'll remember, the past was not erased. It became part of the city's soul. In a single frame, history lives. Hiroshima 1945, broken, burning, lost. Hiroshima 2025, alive, vibrant, and at peace. A city once leveled by fire now leads the call for nuclear disarmament. Its scars are still visible, but so is its strength. In its rebirth, it carries a message. Destruction is not the end, it is a choice the world must never make again.